Prime Minister and federal Conservative leader there trading barbs ahead of the biggest test in the House of Commons for the Liberals yet. A confidence vote on support for the budget is set for Monday. What are the political stakes and what might happen with that vote? Let's bring back our front bench. Christy Clark, Marco Mendicino, James Moore, and Tony Clement. It was just a week ago, Marco, we were wondering out loud as the news broke that Matt Jenner, Conservative MP, was resigning as an MP, whether that would change the math. The math will stay the same. The government, however, thanks to Chris D'Entremont, is just too short, the Liberals rather, 2 seats short of a majority. Is there any doubt in your mind that this budget passes?
Well, I mean, I'm cautiously optimistic in part because, we're 1 vote closer to the magic number that we need to pass the budget on that first milestone, which will be next week. There's never a completely zero chance that things couldn't take a surprising twist, as we saw in last week's panel during the commercial segment, which we all made for interesting commentary and television. But I think in the meantime, what I would observe is that it is encouraging if you sit in the Liberal benches and if you're the Liberal government, that Conservatives are seeing elements in a budget that appeal to them and to the people that they represent. For example, the fiscal restraint around public service modernization and working closely with the rank and file of the public service to make it more efficient so we can save and show more responsibility towards taxpayer dollars. I think equally, there are elements that appeal to those on all sides of the political spectrum when it comes to building. And that's precisely what the Prime Minister said was at the core of this budget, which is how do we get major projects done? How do we get energy to market? How do we build houses? How do we reinvigorate our defense industrial sector? I mean, those are important initiatives which need to accelerate so that we can create jobs. And by doing that, I think you then speak to and relate to a lot of Canadians who, yes, remain anxious about the current state of the economy and want to see forward progress. And so the fact that people are coming on side, and I don't know how many others there might be. There may still be others, but I think it's encouraging. It shows broad appeal.
Let's split the difference there for a second, James, and ask first on the politics of it, your view of what you think will happen next week, but on the less on the politics within the House and more on what's happened over the last week in your assessment of how the Prime Minister and his team have tried to sell the budget.
I think the budget will pass, mostly because the NDP are broke and broken, and I don't think that they're in a position to trigger an election campaign. So I think they'll find a way to have a couple people stay away or abstain in such a way that allow the Liberals to move forward. Look, the budget, Marco, underlined some of the good things in the budget, and there are some reasonable things in there. Capital cost allowance, $81 billion in new defense spending, a quarter of that for retention, recruitment, and salary increases. The other 3/4 for procurement that allow us actually to have some independence and distance ourselves perhaps from the United States in some ways, and also to embolden us to preach about our closing the gap on 3 to 5% of GDP on defense spending. Like, there's some good things there, lowering the immigration levels for the country in a way that'll be more sustainable for the pressures on our social programs. Those are all good things. However, the high level of indebtedness, the high level of a burden that are still on Canadians, and the lack of any real items in the budget that will relieve in the immediate term the cost pressures on Canadians, those are our real selling features for the Conservatives in their retail effort to attract voters to the Conservative movement. So I think the fault lines are clear. The Conservatives are very proud about their messaging and their ambitions to be the voice for Canadians who are struggling to make ends meet. And the Liberals are very proud of that they have a macro budget by a macro economist who thinks that the country is going to be able to shift in a different way. So I think it leads to a good debate and a healthy 2026 and probably a campaign within the calendar year.
Where does it leave the NDP, Christy?
Well, they're not in a good place right now. I mean, the one thing you could argue that the NDP kind of won out of the budget is that the Carney Liberals were very, very light touch on the changes to the bureaucracy in the federal government, which I've always argued is much, much too big. And they are not demanding big cost-cutting measures by downsizing staff in the federal government. My instinct tells me that they would have been likely to do so had they not been depending on the NDP. So it looks like the NDP actually, from my perspective, did get a little win out of the budget. I'm not sure they're in favor of all of the economic growth and development coming from the resource sector as much, but they are really in tough times. As James said, they have no money. They've got a leadership campaign coming up. They've got tons of discontent within their caucus. This budget isn't going to pass because Conservatives like it. It's going to pass because the NDP cannot afford an election right now. And, I guess they got some small win out of it by a government that is really, has failed to do enough to cut spending within government. But, you can thank the NDP for that. They were quiet about it, but they got something of what they wanted.
Although I think, Tony, from what my conversation, my interviews with Don Davies, they would have liked to see even less restriction on spending. Is there a chance you think the NDP could surprise us?
Well, I was harboring that illusion until I heard today that they still have $23 million of campaign debt. So let me assure your viewers that no political party is going to rush to the polls when they still have that burden on their shoulders. So I think there'll be some diplomatic flu going around the NDP caucus. So I wouldn't worry if I was a Liberal.
I wanted to get everyone, as however many minutes we have left, in also on the other big story of the week. I started the block off by talking about Matt Genereux. Obviously, Marco, that followed an actual defection from, and you referenced this, from the Conservatives in Mr. d'Entremont to the Liberals. Yesterday, for the first time, Pierre Poilievre addressed questions about this publicly. He'd been talking in the House, but not about anything to do with this. I mean, he said that he would, he was asked a question about whether he would reflect on his leadership and the accusation from Mr. d'Entremont that the office was like a frat house. I'm just going to play a quick clip of what he said, and then I'll get you to weigh in.
So again, I asked you if you thought that if what you thought Mr. d'Entremont meant by your party being run like a frat house, whether or not you thought that would lead to more MPs leaving your caucus. That's my question for you, sir.
No. So I answered your question. And so the answer that I have back to you is that Mr. d'Entremont this is a quote from just a few months ago, where he said that Liberal food price inflation was inhumane. And you know what? He's right. Thank you.
So, Marco, where do you think this goes from here?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think the thing that we can all agree on about Mr. Poilievre is that he's consistent in his style of leadership, if nothing else. And I would say, in spite of some of the constructive criticism that I think that has been offered to him to reflect and recalibrate, he seems to be very much committed to that style that you see. And it must be that in his mind, he believes that ultimately that style will prevail. Now, I do think that losing a member of your caucus to the other side of the aisle is significant. Seeing a second member of Parliament resign fairly abruptly and fairly recently after the last election, after having reoffered, again, recently to the community, is significant. Having a lot of speculation out there that there may be others within your caucus who may have contemplated or are currently contemplating either supporting the budget or similarly leaving their caucus should cause one to reflect. So I think, to come back full circle to the beginning of your question, if there's one thing that we can make of it, it's that Mr. Poilievre will remain consistent to his style of leadership through thick and thin.
I think that's true for the most part, but there was some evidence in the past few months that he was attempting, or maybe the team around him, James, were attempting something different in, for example, engaging with mainstream media like me in a far less combative way than he did in the press conference yesterday. It feels like that sort of push and pull is playing out publicly. Where do you think this heads?
Yeah, yesterday was a bit feisty and a bit defensive, but it's been a stressful week for the party. And look, I think the floor crossing question seems to be closed. Mr. d'Entremont seems to be a constituency of one in his crossing of the floor. The Matt Genereux story, I think, we all know, is a little bit more complicated. But pushing that aside, Pierre Poilievre is the leader of the party. The caucus. The thing about Pierre, I think, in his leadership, is that the caucus wants him to win. They want him to be successful. They don't just accept that he's the party leader, that he has engendered a lot of personal support within the caucus that is greater than the public polls show that his support is with the general public, because caucus members see Pierre as, frankly, one of the hardest working people I've ever seen in politics. He is nonstop. He goes to event after event after event, and he's tireless. And they see the effort that he's putting in to try to take the party over the top and to have them be successful. They're frustrated by the fact that he got more votes than Stephen Harper ever got in any of the 5 elections that he contested as leader, and they believe that the vote split and the Donald Trump effect and the persuasion of Mark Carney were the 3 elements that were on the table. And if any one of those 3 elements, that if Mark Carney develops some rust and disappoints the public, if the NDP get up on their feet a little bit, and if the Donald Trump effect is abated in some way, that if any one of those 3 elements changes, that Pierre Poilievre can win. He did better than any Conservative leader did since 1988. And it's just right within their grasp, they feel. And so they're frustrated when things like Chris d'Entremont happens. And so I think the emotional blowback over the floor crossing by some Conservative members was for sure over the top, not helpful, not sort of befitting of a party that wants to have the privilege of governing the country. But it speaks to kind of the emotional frustration that a lot of people there have, that they really want Pierre to win. They want him to do well, and they're frustrated at the disappointment that they've had so far.
Christy, what do you think about that?
Well, I think that Poilievre has changed a little bit more than most people give him credit for. I think I see him trying something a little bit different. It's not quite as loud, quite as heavy-handed as it was. I do think, too, I mean, in the Conservatives are not as, it's Liberals that get rid of their leaders a lot, and Conservatives tend to stick with them. And I think there's some truth in what James says, in that Poilievre is going to be allowed to stick around. He's going to make it down to, he's going to have probably some testing times in the spring, early spring of next year. We'll see how that goes. But I think people are prepared to give him the time to get there and face that test and see how he comes out of it once his caucus and his party have had their say.
Tony?
Well, let's make this point. I think that Pierre Poilievre has grown since the end of April. He has grown with adversity that has been thrust upon him, even though he did very well in the election. And I'm going to say something a little bit heretical, perhaps, but I believe that this country needs Pierre Poilievre more than ever when it comes to the issues that most Canadians care about, whether it's affordability or housing or immigration or keeping our streets safe. He is absolutely talking about the things that people really care about. So Pierre Poilievre should remain in his position, and he should lead the Conservative Party in the next election.
Marco, clearly that's the view of Conservatives. I think that's a point to be taken for sure. Does it seem to you like that is what Mr. Poilievre is focused on, particularly with the leadership review coming? Like the focus is that versus, adding to the voter bloc?
Yeah, and I would obviously defer to James and Tony, who know their party a hell of a lot better than I do. And I do think that one of the stronger skill sets that Mr. Poilievre has is being focused like a laser on affordability. And those are issues, those pocketbook issues around being able to afford groceries, being able to afford gas at the pump, being able to afford getting into that first home, that he has shown just an absolute doggedness and focus on. So that is a skill that he possesses. And I think if nothing else, it is a reminder to my political tribe, to the Liberal government, that we too have to focus on those pocketbook issues, even as we talk about macroeconomic framing, as James put. We've got to remember that when we got elected, we cut taxes for 22 million Canadians. We got to remember to emphasize that we canceled the carbon tax. Those were issues that were squarely designed to speak to affordability. And so as we talk about building big things, let's also remember to stress and emphasize affordability, because that is top of mind. And if we don't do that, then you know that Mr. Poilievre will step into that space for sure.
Okay, I got to leave our discussion there. Thank you so much, everybody. Appreciate it. Our front bench, Marco Mendicino, Christy Clark, James Moore, and Tony Clement.